You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Megan Kelly here, and you're listening to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast. As a follow-on from our podcast that we did with Donna, when she was chatting about her amazing workshops she did with the elephants, we decided to get the man himself, Tony Nevin, to come and speak to us. We were actually hoping for him to be on the podcast with Donna. Just with internet and work and all the situations, he's quite a busy man. It didn't happen, but I'm really happy to have him online today to chat to us all about his courses, about osteopathy, and we've got loads and loads of topics and conversations that we're going to have tonight. So welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm very pleased to be with you, and apologies I couldn't make it when Donna was on.
Oh no, well, we're grateful to have you on now. Tony, you have a company called Zoos Limited, and I mean, I had a quick look at your website, and I see that you've actually been working as an animal and human osteopath now for 31 years.
I know, it's scary actually, isn't it? Yes, and a lot has changed within all of our professions in the last 3 decades. So
now, I'm sure this is something that's going through all the listeners' minds too, because it always crosses my mind. When I hear about osteopaths, I always wonder, what is the difference between an osteopath and a chiropractor?
Very good question. Originally, they were one of the same profession, and then politics got involved, and also sort of a lack of understanding with what at the time it was through the human body. What it was, we were actually trying to treat, and those that remained osteopaths decided that the rule of the artery was supreme, so you needed a good blood supply to every part of the body for it to function correctly. What became chiropractic said, no, what is the supremely important thing is an uninterrupted nerve supply. And of course, with modern medicine and modern sort of pathology work, we know that they both follow exactly the same pathways, and you can't really treat one without affecting the other. And so that sort of political divide started, and then through that we ended up with sort of slightly different techniques and approaches to how the patient is treated and how the patient is approached. But I would say now in the 21st century, most of those differences are not really understood. So if you saw 10 chiropractors and 10 osteopaths work, you'd probably be a little bit confused by the end of it. But within the UK, Parliament deemed the profession separate enough to warrant separate acts through Parliament to govern them. And so we've continued as 2 separate professions, but we link a lot on CPD, postgraduate things, and about some of the stuff we're probably going to talk about this evening.
Wow, thanks for that explanation. I've never heard that before, and that actually that makes me understand it a little bit better, actually. So you obviously started off as a human osteopath and then moved into animals. And what I'm amazed to see is that you've even treated fish, birds. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you moved into animals. I mean, the animal rehabilitation world now is something that's growing, and in many countries there is no legislation as to who can treat animals, and it's vets, and there's all this confusion. And with a lot of the disciplines such as chiropractic and osteopath, it has been sort of a human practitioner who has just sort of moved over into that field. So how did you move over? What was the reason? Is it a pet that you had, or a specific case of maybe a client that got you to start treating animals?
It all began whilst I was at college, and I was actually listening to a news report about China sending some pandas over to Edinburgh Zoo with the hope that they were going to mate. And then it never happened. And I was watching them, and I was watching the fact that these pandas were in a fairly small enclosure. And I thought, right, well, we're already seeing patients in the school clinic here where they're in sedentary jobs. They're struggling to start families, and some of them wouldn't come in saying that they were struggling to start a family. They'd come in saying, my back's stiff, my lower back, and this, that, and the other, and then we'd sort their lower backs out, and then next time you'd see them, they'd inform you that they were pregnant and would it affect the treatment, and that they'd actually been trying for a couple of years, and this, that, and the other. And I started thinking, well, pandas normally range over a vast area, and if they're in a sedentary type situation, their fertility could well be affected. So I thought this would be great if you could treat them. So that's how the seed was sown. And then I started looking for other practitioners working with animals, and I found that they were very few and far between. And when I tried to do my final year dissertation on the prospect of treating megafauna, my tutors sort of laughed it out and said, no, you know, if you want to pursue something like that, do that once you're out of college, don't waste time here. And that was a sort of a bit of a red rag to a bull. So I thought, right, I'll show you when I have qualified, I'll go out and I'll find the biggest thing I can to treat, because I want to see for myself really where the ceiling is for what we can do. And I bit off way more than I could chew, because one of the first things I got presented with was a vet at one of the zoos in the UK who is now a very good friend of mine, but at the time I had no idea was a practical joker. And he got wind of what I wanted to do, arranged for a news crew to come and film me examining one of their baby elephants, which was sort of the size of a room. And so I turned up. I had a film crew in my face, which was one thing I wasn't used to, and an elephant in sort of the other half of my face, and a vet in the corner giggling his head off, watching me try and make what I could of the assessment and treatment. And it was a young elephant with a very real problem. It had a lameness, and it had come over from Myanmar, and at the time, this is going back quite a few years, the training techniques in Myanmar for captive elephants were pretty brutal. And so she had come over here with a lameness that we think was related to how she was sort of trained, for want of a better phrase. But the weird thing was, by the end of the session, the keepers thought that I'd achieved something. So they invited me back. And that started this whole journey. And then once I'd sort of sorted out, at the time she was about a 2-ton elephant, she was a youngster, I then started getting asked to look at other species. And from that, we've just grown into this sort of massive sort of database of various species and subspecies that we've worked with, but always following sort of a set routine of protocols, so that it might look random if you see me working, but I'm going through sort of a set of protocols that stop me from freaking out when I'm faced with something like a fish or a bird of prey or a large reptile, where you think, okay, how on earth am I going to sort of have a beneficial effect on this patient? But by going through these protocols, so far the glass ceiling we haven't reached, so we just keep going up and up and up. And the nice thing is that other people are joining in now from all of these sort of allied professions, and are beginning to get involved.
Yeah, so I mean, you have do you actually have a team, so like a multidisciplinary team that is addressing some of these wild animals?
We have a loose team. So if I'm doing field work, there are certain people I try and work with, and we've all got sort of our own day jobs, and then we meet up for certain projects. And the team is forever growing. So I've got vet students at the moment that often join me, and and they're already sort of in semi-paid positions with me, because they're showing so much interest and they're putting so much in as well, that we're creating jobs for them, so that by the time they qualify, they've already got a sort of they're much further advanced than they would be as a normal graduate. And the great thing is that they're used to the way I work, and I've been sort of molding them a little bit and getting them to open their eyes and not just think that what you're taught in college is the be all and end all of it, and the fact that when you're actually out in the field, you never stop learning.
Yeah, I mean, so let's just backtrack a little bit. You know, obviously when you treated that baby elephant, I bet you that day you didn't think that you would be traveling all over the world teaching elephants and teaching people and doing workshops. And I love that interview that I did with Donna, and, just chatting about the elephants, and, as you're chatting about sort of going through the protocols, and you have like a system basically. And I just think to myself, when you're treating an adult elephant, how long does the treatment take? You can't really assess the whole of them, or can you?
Well, that is a really good question, because usually what you do with even so-called domestic elephants, they generally have a fairly short attention span. They get bored very quickly. So you have to look at them and assess what is the most important thing today that we're going to try and achieve with them. And then you'll observe them move. When you place your hands on, you are already fast tracking into what you're expecting to feel from the visual aspect of it. And so your hands are really reading the animal as quickly as possible, going, is what I saw what I'm feeling, and if not, why not, and what do I need to do, and then what will the elephant allow me to do to actually access that. And the whole key to it is the animal dictates how much you do. And so generally speaking, with elephants, you don't do a half hour or 40-minute treatment, because in the past when I have done that, they'll often go into sort of not quite full shock, but their central nervous systems are unbelievably sensitive. So what you normally find is about 5-10 minutes of hands-on is all you need to do for that day. But what they can do is they can accept a treatment every day for about 3 or 4 days, and then you leave them for a couple of weeks, and then you could do a similar amount again. But that's for sort of that's a really generalized one. Some of the elephants we've seen where they've got physical injuries, where the vets are treating them, where they've, say, been fighting, and they may well have tusk wounds and things like that. Then with those I've done lymphatic drainage treatments 3 or 4 times a day over a 2-week period. By the end of that, those elephants are unbelievably well bonded with you. And the first one I ever treated in Thailand was one of these, and I did 16 days solid working with this elephant every day, and then I didn't see it again for 3 years. And when I did, it bellowed for me to go near it, which is something you don't do unless the mahout is around, and the mahout wasn't, so I had to back off. And then the mahout heard this elephant bellowing. He ran out, he let it off. They just have them on a loose chain, because where they are up in northern Thailand, if they wandered off, they could easily go into another country, and then there's all the political aspect of trying to get that elephant back. So they're not chained up, but they're just on a loose chain. And he unchained the elephant, and it just came straight over and laid down in front of me, and it hadn't seen me for, I think it was either 3 or 4 years, and literally just lay there waiting for me to treat it. By this stage, it was a fully grown bull elephant, which you just don't normally expect them to do. And that elephant, whenever I've seen it since, remembers me.
It's amazing. Isn't there a saying, something, I'm really bad at sayings, but someone's got a memory like an elephant? Is that a thing?
Yes, yeah, it is. And yeah, there's another case with a young orphaned African elephant at one of the programs in Kenya, and I treated that when it was about 3 weeks old, and it was basically at death's door. So the vets had treated it for pneumonia. And elephants, it turns out, don't have a cough reflex, but I didn't know that at this particular point. So me with my big mouth said, oh, well, with dogs and that, what we do is there are these trigger points you can do to get them to cough or regurgitate stuff. And so the centre basically said, well, do whatever you want, because she's going to be dead in the morning if something doesn't happen. And because the infection had been treated, but the lungs were still full of fluid, and she was recumbent. And so I did all these reflexes and sort of some articulation work. And basically, she just, a little bit like somebody, if you've ever dragged anyone out of the sea, and when they cough up water, all this fluid just started just flowing out of her mouth from her lungs. And then she sort of spluttered a bit and stood up a bit shaky and wandered about. And I went back about 3 days later to check on her, and she saw me and she just came straight at me and she knocked me clean off my feet. And they said, oh yeah, we forgot to warn you, when they see a white face, they generally think it's the vet coming to jab them, so they basically try and take the vet. And so she just took me clean off my feet and then was sort of running around. But it was incredible to see. Well, then I didn't see her for 7 years, and I was out doing a field trip in Kenya, and we were in Tsavo National Park, Tsavo East, and I was out with a group of with some rangers, and I had a workshop group with me, and we were actually bushwalking with some elephants that were being hacked back into the wild, and this ranger said, "Oh, here comes here comes Wendy's group by the look of it, up to this waterhole." And I sort of said, "Wendy, is she about 7 years old?" And he said, "Yes, did you sponsor her?" And I said, no, I treated her when she was small." And he said, "Oh, let's see if she recognizes you." And of course, in the back of my mind is, last time she saw me, she flattened me, and she's a hell of a lot bigger now. And so she came literally in line with this other group of sort of roughly 7-year-old elephants that were now hacked back into the wild. And she came up through the group, and then she stood, and I don't know if you've ever been around elephants, but they'll sniff you, and they dribble mucus all the time they're doing it. So she sniffed me from head to foot, and then her whole body language altered, and she was just relaxed and vocalizing and all that. And the ranger said, "Well, she clearly recognizes you." He said, "I reckon you could examine her if you want to." So I tentatively did, and so I did this sort of examination of an elephant that technically was now wild and living back in the wild. And then she mooched around with the group for about half an hour. And then when it was time for them she decided it was time for her group to leave, she sort of signaled them. And then she meandered through the entire group of people, came up past me, and then just bashed me hard in the shoulder, and then walked off squeaking and swaying as she went off. And then they just, you know how elephants just melt into the undergrowth, and her whole group just disappeared. And luckily I had sort of dark sunglasses on, because I sort of had tears pouring down my face, because it was just such an emotional interaction with an animal that is technically wild. So they definitely do remember things.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing. I've got a really strange question to ask, and it's just because, I remember, when I was doing work with horses, so I used to do acupuncture on horses before I sort of started focusing on the small animals. And I remember treating them and often doing a bit of massage too. They'd always stand on your feet. And so as you're talking now, I'm just having this thought, have you ever had an elephant stand on your foot?
I've had an elephant stand on me. I've had young ones where you're sat down, and like all babies, they want to sleep in the heat of the day. But the moment they think you're asleep, that's when they get up and they decide to climb on you. So I've had youngsters do that. I've had adults stand on me. I've been kicked by a couple of elephants as well, and that's not pleasant. But they're usually warning kicks. But they can kick unbelievably quickly. But it's a larger surface area, so it doesn't hurt quite the same as being kicked by a horse. Horse kicks, I think, are always much worse, because they when they do kick, they really mean it. Whereas most elephants will kick at you to get you out of the way. So yeah, it's not. I'm not wishing I touched some wood whilst I say this, but I've not been kicked badly by an elephant yet. I've been whacked with their trunks and their ears and their tails. And a friend of mine lost his 2 front teeth when an elephant hit him in the face with its tail. So they're pretty tough, yeah.
So you've treated other animals like fish and birds. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine treating a bird. I remember when I was learning acupuncture, I remember seeing in my acupuncture book actually acupuncturing birds, but I've never had the opportunity to. So just the thought of treating a bird, doing sort of rehabilitation techniques is a bit daunting.
Again, it's this thing of getting back to the protocols. So if you just think of the main protocols of the way you would approach a patient, and then breaking it down to, okay, what is it this bird needs to do? So most of the bird work I've done has been wildlife. So they're wildlife casualties. you get to see some chickens and other sort of farm livestock, and occasionally you get to see domestic birds, as in like pet parrots and things like that. The important thing with the wild birds is knowing what they need to do. So if they're a bird of prey, you know that their flight, their wings and their ability to fly and steer with their tail has got to be paramount. If they're sort of a waterfowl or something like that, you just need to know that they can do well enough to survive and thrive in the wild. So their ability to fly as perfectly as a bird of prey is not paramount. But if you've got migratory birds, then obviously it's critical, because if a 1 or 2% deficit in their ability to function properly could mean that they die. And then it's a case of working through the fascia. So that with birds you don't massage them, because you'll just destroy the plumage. So instead what it is sort of looking at it and going, functionally, if a limb doesn't want to sort of move this way, but it wants to move this way, then take it further into this pattern and get the tissues to release the tension. So if you take the tension off, and then through the Golgi tendon apparatus and all of that, you can start to switch things down at a spinal cord level, and then the muscle spindles can start to reset at a normal resting state. Once they do that, then the fascia has a chance to rehydrate. And so in a very simplified way, you can alter the mechanics of the wings without getting hold of them and wrenching them, or doing things that would actually probably get a recoil tightening of those tissues. And I've basically just worked through the birds, through their neck, the wings. Obviously they've got massive modifications to their bony structures so that they're lighter weight, and they've got larger fused areas so that the thoracic vertebrae are basically a block. They have a much bigger sternum with a keel to it for the big flight muscles to attach and all of that. So you get used to feeling through that. But also just about every bird has a really fast metabolic rate. So it's really important that what you do is about 1/10 of what you would do, say, on a dog or a cat, because otherwise you can really easily stress them and put them into a state of shock.
Sure, I learned a lot there. I'm curious about the fish. I mean, do you treat the fish with your hands in the water? Yeah, very much in their environment. And again, with these, it's a case of, okay, generally speaking, you have the fish in a fairly confined body of water, and you basically let them swim between your fingers, and then you can depending on the size of them, and you can gently work on the axial structures of the fish, and all of it is this sort of soft tissue working through the myofascial patterns, which we're realizing now that just about every type of animal has, where they've got sort of fascia and connective tissue. For want of a better phrase, we call it fascia in the fish, but it's more sort of connective tissue. And it just we call it functional in osteopathy, where you work by improving the functionality rather than looking for symmetry. And this is one of the big things in the past at college. They were always trying to teach us, you must try and get everything as symmetrical as you can. And then you start looking at genuine anatomical models, and you go, none of these are symmetrical. So they're close to it, but they're not symmetrical. So really, what we look at doing is trying to normalize the function of that individual. And with most quadrupeds, as you know, horses and dogs and all that, they're either right or left footed. They've now found that something like 80 or 90% of kangaroos are left-handed and things like that. So they're realizing that in sort of mammals and animals with higher brains, you tend to have a dominance with one side of the brain to the other, and therefore you need to adapt the patient or try and treat the patient such that you're not damaging that bias, but you're just trying to make them move as freely and without friction as possible. And so we do that with the fish. So it's very intuitive. You're not measuring things, going, I'm going to get you to bend 5 degrees this way because you're not doing so well. It's very much you're working with your hands, and it's almost like playing
a musical instrument that doesn't have keys or buttons that you can press. You've got to feel your way through, and one fish is going to be completely different to another, the same as one bird will be different to another.
So I'm interested, how did the fish find you?
Now, these are generally domestic fish, so these would be sort of expensive koi carp and things like that, and people will be sort of saying, well, there's a problem with this, and some of the vets in the UK use homeopathy in that, and so they will put homeopathic remedies into the pond or into the tank, and then you're very often working with those professionals to try and then just improve that particular fish even further.
Sure. I mean, it's amazing. I just think about a fish being referred to an osteopath. It's awesome.
Well, I guess some of my human... Sorry.
No, you carry on.
I was going to say, some of my human patients are always cracking jokes like, how do you get a chimpanzee to pay the bill and things like that. So you get asked all sorts of interesting questions that you wouldn't think of, asking yourself, because basically all of these animals, the wildlife, generally I put my time in at a wildlife hospital as and when I can, and it's very much you turn up and you don't know what is going to come in, because it's not always wildlife you expect to see. Sometimes it's migratory stuff that's blown well off course. Sometimes the RSPCA have dropped off a non-indigenous species that's arrived in some food from somewhere else around the world, and so you get, do you want to come and have a look at this, and you're sort of pushed into an enclosure and something comes firing out of a bale of hay or something at you, and the others are laughing whilst you're sort of wrestling a wild boar or something like that. So it's never dull, never dull at all.
Oh, I think you're very brave, very, very brave. What is the most unusual animal that you've treated, if you can think back over the 31 years?
I didn't get to treat it, but I did get to examine it. That was a pangolin. That was amazing. And that was in Zimbabwe. Bats are really interesting because of the very thin membranes to their wings, and the fact that physiologically a lot of their functioning is upside down, and so that's really weird to deal with. I'm trying to think of some of the other really unusual ones.
Did you ever get to treat a panda?
Pandas? No, I still haven't treated either a red or a giant panda, so they're still on my list, and it's sort of, in a sense, I'm a bit frightened if I ever do, because then that would have been the whole reason I got into it. So will I then stop at that point?
So Tony, let's chat a little bit about your courses. So obviously Donna that I interviewed, she attended your course, and it sounded absolutely amazing. And I remember when Donna reached out to me, I just thought, this was something that I'd absolutely love to do. So coming from South Africa, I've obviously been exposed to quite a lot of wildlife. And when we were in final year, we had to either decide to do birds or fish or wildlife. And I was always going to be a horse vet, which I ended up actually going into small animals eventually. But I was going to be a horse vet. My thought was, well, I'll never see a fish or a bird, so I will do the wildlife. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, I went in helicopters and, I did some of the, they do those green sort of darting. And then there was a guy that came out. Yeah, so there was a elephant that was sick, and then somebody comes from the States and they pay a whole lot of money and they actually dart them with drugs to sedate them, and then we run in quickly from the ground level and treat the elephants and rhinos and loads of different animals. So when I heard about your workshop, I actually thought, that would be just so fabulous to do that again, because it's been years. Tell us a little bit about your workshops. I know obviously the one that Donna went, but it sounds like you have other workshops all around the world. Is that right?
We have done, yes, and we're trying to expand them, but it's down to this problem of running clinics in the UK and then doing overseas workshops. But over the years, I've done an elephant one in Kenya. We've done 7 elephant ones in Thailand, and then I've done a couple of Mediterranean ones where we've worked with Mediterranean wildlife, which range from vultures right the way through to tortoises and things like that. And I'm trying to set up with another vet friend of mine from France. He's recently opened a wildlife hospital on Sumatra for everything other than orangutans, because there's a lot done for the orangutans, but actually not so much done for all the other indigenous wildlife. And that hospital's just sort of getting up and going, and we're hoping that we can sort of, what I'd like to do is set up a rota of people that can actually go out there once we've got enough people that I know will not do anything stupid. You alluded to me being brave in that. I'm not brave. What I do is I try and make situations very safe, and then it allows it to be possible. So I sort of try to minimize the risks, and then it allows you to do things that nobody else has really thought of doing. And that's what I want to do. Now we're getting a network of people some people have been on several of my workshops, and I get them to sort of help with various bits. And so we're building up from that. But generally speaking, wherever we are, when we were in Kenya, we ended up treating giraffe, various antelopes and that. When I was in Zimbabwe, we were looking at big cats, elephants, giraffe, wildebeest, and it goes on and on. And then in the sort of my normal UK stuff, I'm working at various zoos and safari parks in the UK, as well as still treating people, and then all the horse work and the domestic animal work. And it means all the time we're building up sort of a database of information. I use a lot of high definition thermal imaging so that we can assess what is normal in a particular species, and then when we do get presented with something, with a problem, we can sort of compare thermal images and other things like that. So before we've even stressed the animal by touching it, we've got a standoff way of assessing the musculoskeletal system and what's going on through the autonomic nervous system. And so yeah, there's a fair bit we've done, and I do run sort of one-day workshops in the UK where we look at British wildlife and stuff like that, but I'm looking at really expanding those over the next couple of years. And probably the biggest thing that's held me off at the moment is I'm literally in the final stages of editing a massive textbook on animal and avian osteopathy, which we want it to become the bedrock of postgrad teaching in animal osteopathy. So once that's out of the way, I've got a bit more time to actually go chasing some of these other projects. And you really must come and join us on one of the elephant workshops. It'd be an honour to have you there.
I'd love to. I mean, what type of people are coming on these workshops? Is it mainly professionals, or?
It's usually a mix of osteopaths, chiropractors and physios, but I've run separate ones in northern Thailand for what we call range state vets, so vets throughout Southeast Asia that spend either nearly all their time or all their time treating elephants, and those have been really successful. And I think at one point we had vets from 11 different countries attending, and all of us were sharing our knowledge base in that, and I was trying to teach them some of the sort of easily repeatable techniques and protocols that they could use to take back to sort of Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, the rest of Thailand, Sumatra, Borneo, and Vietnam and all of that, and really sort of expand out some of the stuff that can be done to help both wild elephants that are brought into rescue stations, but also the so-called domestic populations, because the weird thing in Southeast Asia is most of the elephant problems out there are either human-elephant conflict with crop raiding and reduced habitat, or people taking young elephants from the wild and selling them because they're for high-value commodities. That generally the poaching is very minimal at the moment because of the tusks are so small on most of them. And so by improving the welfare of those animals that are already sort of in domestic situations and licensed, then we're reducing the demand on the wild population. So that's sort of one of the bizarre sort of conservation angles that I've been working on is that in a lot of these countries there are more elephants that are owned than there are in the wild, and we're trying to redress that balance by just saying, look, if you look after this elephant differently, it's going to last you a lot longer, be a lot happier, and you're going to have a much easier life looking after it. You don't need to keep buying more elephants.
Yeah, it's sad. I'm very excited about your textbook. Really, really excited. I can just imagine the undertaking. Is it basically for osteopaths, so to help human osteopaths to make a switch into the animal world, or would it be applicable to physios and vets to learn from it too?
Well, we've geared it to, because it's been a team effort, but I was the sort of the catalyst that got it going, and I've been probably the main contributor on the book. It is aimed for the postgraduate osteopath, so yeah, very much osteopaths that have a good grounding in all the academia and the practical aspects, so palpation and observation and all of that, and case history taking. And it's aimed at really taking the student up to at least master's level, and would certainly support them heavily if they were doing a PhD. We've also made it as understandable as possible for physios and chiropractors. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but you know how each profession likes to have its own way of talking. We've tried to use very much veterinary terms rather than traditional osteopathic terms as much as we possibly can. And then where we've used osteopathic terms, we've got a glossary to explain what on earth that gobbledygook bit is. And so we want it to be, really, we want to break down barriers. So the idea was we get the osteopathic side. At the moment, there's a very good textbook on equine osteopathy, and that's it, available in the UK. And we saw a massive hole in the market, certainly in the teaching aspect worldwide, that right, let's get all the best people we can to contribute into this book and make it also understandable for chiropractors, physios, vets, vet nurses, and people, sort of sensible like zoo managers, safari park managers, rescue centre managers, all of that, so that there's a much better working understanding that this stuff is available, this stuff works, and this is some of the. It's not a how-to book as such, but really taking those with a knowledge. So you would be able to look at it and go, I understand this. This makes sense. I can understand the thinking through. Each chapter is broken down. We've got the first chapter. There's 10 chapters in all. First chapter is very much an introduction and looking at the comparative anatomy of different species. Chapter 2 is all about the dog, and it's like a small book in itself. Chapter 3 is on the cat. Chapter 4 is, we've called it small furries, so it's all the sort of the small animals that people keep as pets. Chapter 5 is all on the horse, and that's a large book in itself. Chapter 6 is livestock. Chapter 7 is reptiles. Chapter 8 is birds. Chapter 9 is small wildlife, and Chapter 10 is megafauna. It's not absolutely inclusive. We had to leave out marine mammals because the book just got out of control. And what I'd like to do at a later date is sort of add sort of either supplementary manuals that can go with the book. But it's each chapter's got a section by the vets and a section by the osteopaths, and occasionally, like with wildlife and things like that, we've also got experts in handling and health and safety on wildlife to contribute. And it's taken 5 years so far. So it's been I had no idea it was going to take this long. I had no idea it was going to be this much hard work, but we're literally in the final sort of picking out the typos and the other bits in the editing. So it's nearly there, and it's due out in September.
Well, please do let me know when you can buy it. Is it be available on Amazon?
It certainly will, and other good platforms. But yeah, it's ironic. I think it's already listed on Amazon, which is a little bit scary.
Okay. So Tony, the last thing I want to chat about is you actually have your own radio show called The Missing Link. And I had a little listen, and I just want to say the introduction to your radio show, it was completely unexpected. So for those of you now that are really intrigued, you have to go and listen to it. So if you go to the ZooOS website, I think there's a link there. I was completely surprised, but it's very, very cool. I really love your intro. Tell us a little bit about your radio show, what it's about and who it's for.
Okay, the radio show itself, it's called The Missing Link because it's to try and link the very same problems that humans get and the rest of the animal kingdom. And what I wanted to do was through talking about different problems, by talking to real patients and real owners of animals or people who work with animals, to break down this thing of, there's the human race and there's the animal kingdom. We all share this planet. We've all come from the same primordial soup. And I also wanted a little bit of tongue-in-cheek that, I'm the presenter and the producer of the program, so therefore I am the missing link. And it's really to sort of be very conversational and not be too heavy on the science, but for people to listen and then start to go, I didn't realise osteopathy was about this. And I didn't realise osteopaths work with physios and chiropractors, and wow, and so we've included as many of the other professions as we can, and we still are, and it's become a little bit more than light entertainment because we have sort of serious stuff, but sometimes we have patients on who I've known for years, and they just start talking about random things that have happened in their lives that I have no idea about, but they're so entertaining. We just let it run. And then we put music in, and I try where I can to get music that's either again suitable for the subject we've been talking about, or if it's been really heavy, to try and lift people up and out of it. And it's been going now for nearly 2 years. It's online, which means I've got a following all around the world. And yes, you can just click on it. There's a listen again service, so all the old programs are available. And yeah, just let me know. I've had 3 different versions of the opening. And it depends which one you listen to as to which one you have to tell me when we're off air which one it was. But it's sort of all of them. Everybody says, I wasn't expecting that, and we've had real fun with them. But they're not offensive, I should say that. They're fun, but they're probably not what anyone was thinking if they listened to an osteopathic sort of program. And as far as we know, it's the only one of its kind out there. And that was the other reason for wanting to do it, to sort of get a platform there for people in the sort of the animal and human manual therapies, and blow away some of the myths, because we all know what it's like. People have all these images of what everyone does, and for some reason those myths are always stronger than the reality. And so we wanted to sort of break down some of those urban myths.
No, I think it's fabulous. And for the listeners, we will put links to all of this in the notes, so you guys will be able to go and listen. I know everyone's you're going to have like a spark now.
I hope so, yeah.
Download.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Megan.
Tony, it's been so wonderful to talk to you. Your passion just really shines through, and it just amazes me, all the animals that you treat, and I still do think you're very brave to do all the things.
I'm not.
And I do look forward to one day attending one of your workshops.
Please do.
And I was actually just thinking, we do have the Addo Elephant Park here.
I was thinking that when you were talking, yeah.
Maybe we could arrange something here, but we can chat about that after the show. Thank you so much for your time. Wonderful to have you online, and looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope people have enjoyed it. Take care.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Vet Rehabbers, thanks for listening to my podcast. Don't forget to click the subscribe button, and it would be great if you could leave me a review. I want to know, what are you doing on the 15th to the 17th of November? It is our Vet Rehab Summit, which is our online virtual conference for veterinary rehab professionals. Find out more information at onlinepethealth.com.